From the studios of Foxboro Cable Access, located in the center of Foxborough, Massachusetts, you are watching Around Foxborough.
Hello, I'm Joe Sanders, your host for Around Foxborough. And with me tonight is a very special guest, Sara Letourneau, also a Foxtail resident. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, we're glad to have you here. We all are. And I'm sure by the end of this show, the whole audience is going to be glad they tuned in. So, Sara, I have to ask. I see some snippets of things that you do, and I've got to just throw them out there. Book editor, writing coach, workshop instructor, and poet. I know about the poet because I went out and got your book and read it and loved it. We'll talk about that. But
thank you.
So tell just, how did you get into it? This all looks like there's writing involved. So tell us about that.
So I started writing when I was 7 years old. I still remember sitting at the kitchen island writing stories. And back then I was also illustrating them too. And that eventually fell away because those kinds of artistic skills were not up to snuff in some ways. Yeah, I was a storyteller from the get-go. And as I got older, I started dabbling in other kinds of writing, poetry, novels. I have, at this point in my life, like 3 trunked novels that I don't know if I will ever go back to. And I also wrote for student newspapers, so like over at Foxborough High School. I think I did one at the Ahern as well when I was students there. And then when I went to college at Curry College in Milton, I wrote for the newspaper there too. And so for a little while I thought life was going to take me in the direction of journalism, but that did not quite go that way. I ended up going into the corporate world, working in corporate communications for a little bit, and then as a technical editor at an engineering firm. But while I was doing all of that, I was still writing, and I was studying the craft of writing. I was going to conferences in Boston and New York City. I was taking workshops at Grub Street in Boston. I even went on a couple of writing retreats, including one in Iceland. That's how I went to Iceland for the very first time, was for a writing event.
Wow.
And so all that time I was learning more about the craft of writing and, and working on my own stories and making friends with other writers. And there would be points when we would swap work with one another for feedback. And the feedback that I would get on the feedback I gave to other writers was, "This is so good, you should be paid for what you're doing." But it took me a very long time to actually do anything about that advice. So it wasn't until February of 2018, that I launched my business, Heart of the Story, and editorial and coaching services. And through that business, I help other authors with getting their work out into the world, whether they're self-publishing or planning to send queries to agents to try traditional publishing. So I started editing other people's manuscripts and coaching writers through the process of completing their writing projects. And as I'm doing all of that, I'm still writing. But my path of writing started changing because for a while I was focusing on fiction and it really wasn't going anywhere. And then I started coming back to poetry back in 2016, 2017. And things started taking off. My work started getting accepted at literary journals and magazines and anthologies. And various things led to other things that, now I am the co-host and co-founder of an open mic, which takes place next door in Mansfield. And my debut poetry collection came out earlier this year. So yes, my life is full of writing and words, and I really, I love it.
Well, it's obvious you do, because you've got a lot of energy, and it's all positive energy. And I read something, I don't know if it was in the foreword or the book or someplace else, about, it resonated with me about, don't worry about having the finished, everything leads to the next step. You never necessarily have the finished product in mind when you're started. Can you expound, because I don't even know if I'm asking you the right question, but.
Well, I think what that's reminding me a little bit of is when I started submitting Wild Gardens, the book for publication, because I was not interested in self-publishing. For me, it just did not feel like the right path for me. So I submitted the manuscript to, I don't even remember how many publishers, because it took almost 2 years to find a publisher who said yes to Wild Gardens. And I think one of the reasons why is I started the submission process too soon. The original version of Wild Gardens had some of the poems that you see in the final version were not in the original version. Some of the poems that were in there to begin with were not as strong. And I think it was sort of the excitement of having this completed manuscript that sort of compelled me to get started a little bit before I should have. So as I was submitting Wild Gardens to publishers, I was still writing. And some of those newer poems ended up getting accepted, whereas other less strong poems in Wild Gardens weren't getting acceptances. And so I started swapping poems out of the book, and eventually ended up reorganizing how the book was structured too. And it was the first place I sent it to after making those changes or reorganizing the manuscript. I got the acceptance letter for it to be published.
Wow. Okay.
So it was a process to get this out there, and in a way it was a good learning experience because it taught me maybe to be a little bit more patient with book 2 and to make sure that everything is as absolutely good as it can be before I send it to publishers next time.
Okay. Thank you. That clarifies what I was wondering. It reminded me years ago. Someone said to me, because I like to tell stories like verbally, and someone said to me, "Joe, you ought to write a book." I said, "I'm not writing a book." Then I started writing stories, and I post them on my own little blog site. And I'll do that forever, but I don't have any intention of going further. But you said something earlier about was it stand up or open mic?
The open mic.
Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. So Pour Me a Poem meets on the second Thursday of every month at my co-host's house in Mansfield. It's a poetry open mic, although we have had 1 or 2 musicians play as well, but it's primarily for poetry and poets. And so we kick off each event with a feature poet who reads for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we have a break for refreshments, book sales with the feature, and just mingling for a little bit. And then we do an open mic, depending on how many poets and how long everybody reads depends on how many poets are there each night. But we started this event in September of 2022. And so we're past the 2-year anniversary, and we get anywhere between 12 to 18 poets every month. It's grown a lot. It has grown a lot in 2 years. And so the next one after this taping, I believe, is going to be Thursday, January 9th. And we have a Boston area poet, Linda Carney Goodrich, coming to be our feature that night.
And I think we have the information that you've given us on how to, is this something you sign up for, or do you call in advance, say, I'd like to come, or how does that work?
Open mic signups, you can sign up for a slot at the open mic when you arrive. So we don't do pre-registration or anything like that. But if you want more information, people can always reach out to me by emailing me at Sara@heartofthestoryeditorial.com, and I can send you more information.
Great. And I can say this, Sara is very easy to get a hold of. She responded right away when I had not met Sara before this evening, but we did talk on the phone once, and you were very quick to respond to my email because I had your email address, so thank you for that. Made it easier for me. You know, you mentioned, well, when you went to Iceland, and I read all the poems. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a reader as much as I wish I were, but I thought if I'm going to interview, I want to get this book and read. And I really enjoyed these poems. And I got to say right off the bat, the first poem that I read, I said, "Oh, I like that," and it had to do with you were going to Iceland, and I just remember the first line was something like, "Leave your umbrella at home." I thought, oh, it must not rain there. I don't know what I was thinking. But
well, actually, so I remember when I was getting ready for my first trip to Iceland, and the advice in the opening line, "Leave the umbrella at home," was something I had actually, a piece of advice I had gotten, because it is very, very windy in Iceland.
Oh.
And so if you bring an umbrella, I mean, yes, precipitation is unpredictable there, so it probably will rain or snow while you are there, especially, depending on the time of year. But yeah, don't bring the umbrella because the wind is probably going to invert it, and you really won't have an umbrella at the end because it will be broken.
Yeah, if you bring an umbrella, you'll break an umbrella.
But yeah, no, I think it was. I wrote that poem because I was recalling, a lot of the practical advice that I was getting,
Sure.
Before going to Iceland, but then thinking about it also in hindsight in terms of the intangible things. I think the first time you visit another country, you can prepare yourself by bringing the right clothes or, right footwear or whatever. But you will never be fully prepared for what you're going to bring home on a metaphorical level. And so that poem was my attempt to sort of share the practical advice, but also hint at the unexpected thing, the unexpected impact that traveling can have on you.
Well, that right out of the box, reading that poem was a pleasure. And I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you mind reading that poem to me here?
Absolutely.
That would make me like, oh yeah.
Absolutely. So the poem we're talking about is called "How to Pack for Iceland." Leave the umbrella at home. The wind there has a will of its own, and you might not want to tempt it. Plan to dress in layers. How else can one prepare for the unpredictable? Waterproof your body in duck down and feathers and a tortoise shell of nylon. Your feet will want hearths as well, so give them shoes to keep them warm and dry, with cushioned midsoles for support. Don't forget the usual necessities: your passport, your phone, a granola bar, a change of clothes in your carry-on. Most importantly, make room for the things you won't expect to bring home. Fistfuls of fresh air, wild and pristine, deep breaths of black sand and lava salt, the music of geysers and vast countryside, rhapsodic rivers and vacillating sky, singing themselves into your belongings and spreading like incense smoke once the suitcase is open. Last but not least, take a selfie before departure so you can compare it with the one you take upon your return.
Wow, great.
Thank you.
I remember a lot of things, but the whole take home that breath of fresh, I can just see being in Iceland, taking a big, deep, fresh, clear air, right?
It smells. It actually does smell a little bit different there, and it could be for so many reasons. But they do have. Iceland is very much into clean energy, and so they don't have a lot of. A lot of their power plants are like hydroelectric, and so tapping into all the seismic activity and the hot water and underneath the surface there. So it's just there's natural beauty in Iceland that you're just not going to see anywhere else.
Yeah, I was fortunate when I was younger, when I was in the service, I got to travel a lot of Europe, and I'm so glad I did. And I was wondering, there's a lot of interesting places that you've been. Are there other poems that come to mind that you like were inspired by a visit that you had, or?
There are a couple, actually. I mean, Cape Cod, for instance. Cape Cod, there are several poems about Cape Cod in Wild Gardens. And I mean, I grew up on this side of the bridge, but in other ways, I also kind of grew up on Cape Cod. My family went down there a lot for vacations when I was a child. In fact, my birthday falls right around Labor Day every year. And so that was because of my parents would go to the Cape during that time of year. I celebrated my first 5 birthdays in Chatham. Now my family lives down there. My parents live in South Yarmouth, and my brother lives in one of the neighboring towns. So it's still a big part of my life because if I want to visit my family, I get to go to the Cape, which really can't complain about that.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are several poems in the book inspired by whether there were different places I visited in Cape Cod, like Bass River or Oyster Pond in Chatham, but also the place on the front cover of the book, too. The final poem in Wild Gardens is called At World's End, and it's set at World's End Wildlife Sanctuary over in Hingham on the South Shore. And my boyfriend and I actually saw the picture on the front cover first in a gallery on Cape Cod a few years before we had even gone. So I saw this very picture, and said, I gotta find out where World's End is, and I gotta go here someday. And eventually I told my boyfriend about that, and he said, okay, let's go. So we went here for my birthday. I think it was the first year of COVID, so in 2020. We just brought a picnic lunch and we walked around, and it was a lovely birthday, and just being able to explore this place that I had seen in this very picture, a few years earlier, was just very, very special. And the impact it left on me compelled me to write a poem about that too. And then, and just to make a quick nod to the cover itself, so once this Wild Gardens was accepted for publication by my publisher, I knew what I wanted the cover to look like, and I knew I wanted that picture. And so the publisher basically gave me freedom to share whatever ideas I wanted for the cover. So I reached out to the photographer. His name is Mike Sleeper. He's based out in Marshfield. He had actually come to my home, I think a couple years before, for a different painting, for a different photograph, which is also talked about in Wild Gardens. And so he installed, we knew each other. We had already been in touch in the past. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, the poems I shared with you based on your work not too long ago? Well, they're going to be in a book. My book's coming out. Can I use one of your one of your photographs for the cover? And he was like, absolutely.
Good.
And so this is Mike Sleeper's work on the cover.
That's
and
great.
It's perfect. And I've had so many compliments about the cover art and how inviting people think it is and how much it makes it want to read
I
the book.
agree. One thing I didn't ask, maybe it's assumed, can we get your book on Amazon? Or where do you get the book?
You can get the book on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble online, at other places like bookshop.org. You can also buy a copy directly from me if you want to.
Okay.
I'm going to be doing several readings, at the end of 2024 and throughout 2025. And so I'm going to be selling copies of the book at those events. Okay. So I have a box load that people, so if anybody sees this, they are welcome to reach out to me and, by email. Again, that's Sara at heartofthestoryeditorial.com. And we will work out how, your payment and how to get the signed copy to you.
Great. That's wonderful. You mentioned, I remember there were some things in December which may or may not hit before this, or this hit before that, I don't know. But you're going to be at the Boyden Library coming up in the spring. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. So I believe it's Monday, April 7th. It's the first Monday of April. I may have the number of the day wrong, but it's the first Monday of April. And yes, it's going to be sort of our way of celebrating National Poetry Month.
Okay.
So it's going to be a reading/author talk where I'm going to share some poems from the book, but I'm also going to talk about the process of putting the book together. So I'll be offering tips on, how to structure your own poetry collection, as well as the special considerations that I took when I was putting my book together.
Very good. That's interesting. I have a question that I didn't think about asking you until now. I work in the middle school here in Foxborough at the Ahern, and I mean, the kids have all these ideas on what they might want to do. Do you have anything that would be good advice for someone who has the writing skill, or who looks like they would want to get into writing, or what would you encourage them to do with their time when they have free time?
Right,
yeah. I think I'd probably ask for that one, but reading is also I think essential to developing the craft of writing, because you find things that authors or poets do that you like and that you may want to try for yourself, and then you find other things that you would want to do differently. And I would also suggest finding the right people to get to give you feedback on your work, and so that you can give them feedback on theirs too. I suggest that because we can share the things we write with our family or our best friends. And unless they are writers themselves, or they have a really good eye for giving feedback and critique, the most you may hear from some of them is, "Oh yeah, this is really nice, I like it." But you're probably going to want something more than that. And writers are often looking for one another to sort of create that sense of community with each other, and to also get the feedback that they're seeking. And so I would suggest meeting other writers, whether that means like going to a workshop or to writing classes that may be offered in adult education, or going to open mics like mine, especially if you're a poet, and meeting people there and seeing who may be a good fit for you in terms of starting a group or exchanging work and, bolstering your craft that way. So, thank you, by the way. And back to the pour me a poem. Could someone like me just go and listen to the poetry? I don't have to. Not everybody has to give a poem the first time they're there, right? Or is it something we could go and just enjoy observing? Oh,
absolutely. Like my boyfriend comes with me all the time, and he's not a poet. He doesn't write.
He's not a poet. Doesn't know it.
No, he's a supporter. We've had other people just come to just listen, and that's just as. The more people who come, the better. Even if you don't feel comfortable with reading your work right away, or if you are not a writer yourself and you just want to listen and be supportive and get a better, stronger sense of the writing that's coming out of your local community, come to Pour Me a Poem. Absolutely.
Right. That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that, because I'm going to go. I don't know exactly which month I'll start, but I'm going to get a hold of you after this and find out when the next several are and show up, because I think that would be a lot of fun. Well, we've covered, you read a poem. I mean, is there anything else you'd like that's coming up? We got the Boyden event coming up. We got Pour Me a Poem. Anything else you'd like to talk to me about that's of interest to yourself in this line?
I mean, yes, I do have other events coming up. I mean, and there are quite a few of them, so I think the best thing to do is, if you're interested in finding out where I'm going to be reading besides Boyden Library or at Pour Me a Poem, because I'll always share something during the open mic.
Yeah.
You can always go to heartofthestoryeditorial.com /events. And you'll see where I'm going to be reading over the next several months. Beyond that, just a reminder to any writers who are looking for an editor, or they're in the middle of a writing project and they either feel really overwhelmed or they don't know how to get started. I'm always happy to talk to people about the potential of working together. I always do a free call before anybody hires me, just because I like to see if we can strike up a rapport, so that we know we're going to be a good fit for each other. And so if you're interested in that as well, if you know that you're going to need help with your books or stories, send me an email at Sara@heartofthestoryeditorial.com, and we'll take things from there.
Great. Well, Sara Letourneau, you're a wonderful guest today, and I want to thank you for that and look forward to seeing much more of you in the future. And folks, that's it. This is Joe Sanders with Around Foxborough. See you next time.